everyone. I'm Barbara Tien with Project Kin and delighted to welcome you to another episode of Kathy's Corner. Kathy's Corner is lets us focus on one of those really important aspects of every family historian's day-to-day life, and those are the objects, materials, artifacts, the memorabilia that have been passed down to you and that you are a caregiver for, a guardian of, to pass down to the future generations. Our leader today, of course, is Kathy Stone, who brings to us a great expertise in all things photography and particularly the care of the artifacts. So, Kathy, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Barbara. And I'll just say, I don't bring you expertise in photography, but rather taking care of photos already taken. My photography skills are not terrific. And I've now switched to totally using my phone because the camera is better than any other camera I have. But I've had a few years of organizing people's photos and in various collections, including my own. Over time, I've seen a lot of damage to photos. And again, a little bit, it's Save Your Photos Month, sponsored by the photo managers in September. And I wanted to talk about, not in terms of the broad, I've done a lot of work with broad work after flooding, where you're trying to save a lot of severely damaged photos, and a lot of them. That's not what I want to talk about today. I think Barbara's going to pop into the resources or maybe the chat, my What to Do When Disaster Strikes Your Photos article, which talks about it on a grander scheme. But I want to talk today about things you might encounter in your collection, as opposed to the broader question of natural disasters, which of course are a big thing. So I'm going to share my screen. So what we're going to talk about today is several of the things we encounter in our collections. The first are the so-called magnetic albums, or those nifty ones that are sticky. We'll talk a bit about water damage, because water damage doesn't only happen in natural disasters. It can also happen in many other things, like pipes can burst, you can have a fire, something leaks and gets all over your pictures, the basement backs up, or the crawl space. We have basements here where I live, but I know a lot of people just have crawl spaces or nothing. But photos that are stuck to glass, typically in frames, sticky substances on the photos, curled photos, torn photos, smelly photos, faded photos, and anything else that you want to talk about. We'll look at all of those things. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, give me a minute because my notes have vanished. Just 1 second while I get through with my technical things. That's not it either.
If you want to,
never mind.
If you want to unshare and then choose which one.
My notes are underneath you people. That's where they are. Just let me reposition my gallery and I'll be good.
There we go. No problem.
So I probably didn't really need notes to talk about this, but the magnetic albums, they were also called self-adhesive albums, very popular in the 60s and 70s. I almost bet most of you have one or two of these in your collection. And Barbara's going to get one to show, because I didn't have a picture. I've taken mine all apart, so I didn't actually have a picture of the ones I had, other than the photo I have from that's covered in mud, which isn't typically there. But I think Barbara just ran to grab hers and show us. So if she's going to hold it up. She's embarrassed. Yeah, so that's a perfect example. They've got a plastic sheet for a cover. The pages are sticky. And a lot of them had a metal spiral binding on them. There, can we see Barbara's? Or do I need to stop my share so we could see it clearly? We can't hear you now, Barbara.
You should be able to adjust your own screen.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can adjust this.
So that's, surprisingly, these are still sold. Which I'm guessing now they say they're made out of archival quality materials. Back in the day, most of the ones you're going to have with old pictures in them were not made out of archival materials. The glue isn't safe, the paper isn't safe. and the plastic sheets that cover the pages are not photo safe. So the best thing I don't recommend using these because again, I don't know what the glue is like on these, even on the new ones. And because they're just damaging photos. You can see in the picture on the upper left, that's one of mine that came out of a smaller size one. But if you can see the lines through the photo, that's where the glue has darkened and yellowed over time. And I found photos in albums where they've been taken out where that has actually imprinted onto the back of the photo, and in some cases almost gone right through the photo where you can see it on the front of the photo. So the only way we're going to fix that is through editing or the photo to try and get that out of there. And it was a lot of work, put it that way. Usually you come across them in two states. They're either stuck in like they're never going to come out. They either seem like they're permanently affixed to the page, or everything is falling out. The falling out is what you like. When they're falling out, when they're glued to the page, it's very hard to get them out. But we're going to talk a bit about that. So let's go to the next one. And so I found an example of me getting stuff out of one. Option one for dealing with magnetic albums is to scan the photo, the album itself, scan the whole page, and then select the photos digitally after. And that means you don't have to take them out because it's a very long time consuming process to finally get them all out. So that's one way to do it, is to simply not do it and scan the pages. I've scanned them through the page protect, the plastic, scanned them by flipping the paper back. Be aware if you flip the paper back and the pages are still sticky, you're going to get sticky stuff on your scanner bed and have to clean that too. So if you're photographing them, that's even easier. And again, it's going to depend on what the photos are of and the value of the photos, what you choose to do. So option two is always first photograph the whole page, because some of them may have writing on the page too. I have some that my aunt did, and their pages are all, she wrote everything on it, so I had to remove her. Actually, she typed little tiny notes on paper and glued them into the album. So I had to capture all that information too, because it was very valuable, and I'm really glad she did it, but it was a little tough to get it out. So a couple of ways you can start off just by gently lifting a corner of the photo to see if it'll peel off. Some of them will peel off easily, and then you're good. The ones that don't, but don't try and force it, because with any of these things we talk about, don't try and force anything. But you can use dental floss. So what I'm doing there, I'm actually removing a newspaper article from obviously a lot of my photos that I keep are from flood damage, because you can tell by the mud all over my gloves. I'm trying to remove a newspaper article from a damaged album so that the newspaper article can be scanned, because it was very important. And this was quite a few years ago, before I may have been able to find the article on newspapers.com. Lots more stuff there now than there used to be. But and you can use, I'm using dental floss there. So you don't want a flavored dental floss, but just a plain old white dental floss is good, whatever's in the drawer. Or a soft spatula you can use to slip under. Particularly, I wouldn't have done that with the newspaper, but with a photo, you can slip the edge of the spatula underneath and see if you can't lift it up. But again, you go gently because you don't want to tear anything. With the dental floss, you're going to use a sawing motion to basically saw the picture out of the album. You can see where the time involved in doing this is quite significant when you're working a single photo at a time. In the resources I sent to Barbara is a link to where I got this fancy little tool. It's a Creative Memories product, which wasn't intended for prying photos out of albums, but they called it a multi-purpose tool, and indeed it is. It's very useful. So it only costs about $8. So there's a link to that. Some people say to try and loosen the glue with a hairdryer by blowing the hairdryer onto the page. I'm a little leery about that. You could try it. I would be really careful not to use too hot, like not rushing, trying to get the glue to melt. I'm not sure I'd want to try and blow hair on my valuable hair, hot air on my photos. So something to think about. And you could try it on a photo that isn't that's as less significance or that you took a picture of and see if it works. I've never done it because I've done the other methods because it just seems to me um, more, it's a risk to the photo itself to be putting hot air on it. So, and once you've removed them, layer something between them, either archival paper. Wax paper works really good because it doesn't stick to it. Because there will be adhesive still stuck on the back of the photo. Most likely it'll be sticky. And we're going to talk about how to get that sticky stuff off in a minute or two when we get to sticky photos. So that's basically magnetic albums. And then my all-time favorite that I have lots of experience with, water damaged photos. So when you encounter photo, and this is what we call wet, still wet water damage. And when you encounter that, you want to be really careful because of mold or mold, M-O-L-D, either mold, depending on where you're, which language preference you have. So that's the Canadian and British spelling of mold, but the US one is different, but it's all the same nasty stuff, and you want to be really careful. And so I put some just on this slide, just a few examples of mold. Trying to move you off here. So on the top left, all the black stuff that is here, that's mold. This is mold and dirt around the bottom. And again, same thing here, but the black spots are definitely mold. And again, on this one, same thing, that's mold that's formed. It's not just dirt, it's actually mold. And it'll appear like spots. Sometimes they're brown, sometimes they're different colors. This is the inside of a cover with mold. And that's again, there was nothing else there. This was clean water that got on that particular photo. So the mold it's mold. There was no dirt or anything to be in there. It's definitely mold. And when you see the ones which are obviously damaged beyond repair on the far right, that's what a mold looks like when it starts to grow in a photo emulsion that's been broken. Because with the water process, the emulsion is actually on top of this is where I'm dabbling in the photography that I don't really know much about, but I do know that water gets under the emulsion and in some cases lifts the whole photo up. But mold has grown when you get that color distortion. That can be another indication of mold. Mold is very dangerous. It's insidious. You want to make sure you're wearing a mask and gloves when you're handling it. You notice I'm wearing a respirator mask because all my other work with it, I used to wear like an N95 mask, and then even that with some of the stuff I handled wasn't good. So now I automatically throw on my respirator to protect my lungs because you don't want mold likes to grow in wet places, and your lungs and nasal passages are just another one of those wet places. In my article, What to Do When Disaster Strikes Your Photo, I go through the whole process of cleaning water damaged photos, like getting the mud off and handling, with the moldy photos. You can brush some of it off, but it's going to grow back. You can't, like, the only way you can get rid of mold is bleach. And so bleaching photos, obviously not going to work too well. So just keep an eye open. So if they're wet, it's like you've just found a bunch of photos that are all wet, handle them immediately while they're wet, because you've got the greatest success of recovering them if they're still wet. You don't want them to dry in stacks. Again, that wax paper is perfect. Lay it between the photos, lay it between the pages of the album that's got wet. And again, the cleaning process is in my article, so I'm not going to repeat it here. If there's no time to do that, because if you had a pipe burst, you've got wet carpet and furniture and everything else, freeze the photos. Just put them in bags and freeze them. And what the freezing does is stops the mold from growing, and it keeps them wet. When you thaw them out, they're still wet. And then you can deal with them through the whole process of cleaning them if they're dirty, or just dealing with them if they don't have both mold and dirt. These were from a bad flood. It was an overland flood. That isn't just dirt. That's like whatever was getting carried through the flood, and which was included farm animals and things, it wasn't pretty. So that needed very careful safety precautions, and that's my biggest point. Any questions?
I do. Um, what would you recommend to be kind of the kit to have around in the event of damage? Sounds like wax paper, freezer bags.
A
It,
marker to write on them, something to take a picture of, because before you start doing anything, like, and I'll give an example, albums, we had to take apart because the pages in the albums were also wet, and we were going to take the photos off them, like you weren't going to save wet paper. Um, so something to take photographs with, because we photographed the pages and we photographed the cover of the album before we took it apart. And then following it were pictures of the album pages so that we'd know which album it came out of.
mm,
If you're dealing with more than one, if you're dealing with one, then it's not a big deal. What else would I have in there?
maybe your 3x5
Mask,
cards for those
gloves,
notes.
um,
Uh,
post-it notes or something to write on is always helpful. A
mm-hmm,
marker to write on the bags what's in them.
mm-hmm.
Um, and there is like a whole list of equipment in my article too.
Okay.
So it's another
And
place.
stupid question, the dental floss, mint okay, not okay? Go get a special one that's no mint.
Yeah, I don't think it matters.
Oh,
It depends if you could just get unscented one.
unscented,
If you
unflavored.
were building a kit, if in the middle of mine, I'm sure I use flavored ones too, because so I had a suggestion made after I had done a presentation. Someone sent in and said something about why didn't I use, and I forget what it was, instead of wax paper. Why didn't I get some kind of
Parchment paper, for example.
special photographic thing? And I'm like, because in the middle and at 10 o'clock at night, when you have a garage full of moldy, wet photos, most of your neighbors just have wax paper. They don't have all this fancy photo stuff to have. But yes,
Right.
archival tissue paper. I would still use wax paper because stuff doesn't stick to it.
Yeah.
And
Parchment paper is kind of the same. Yeah.
huh?
Parchment paper.
Parchment, yes, parchment would be good too. So something like that. And again, there's a whole list of supplies in, and I'm going to, as we go through, we'll see a couple other examples of things that will be handy depending on what you're trying to fix in a photo.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so that's wet stuff. Now we're on to stuff we found afterwards that's kind of dried out now. And so we've got an album up in the top there. That's negatives, which I treat negatives the same way as I did photos. We separate, like those ones, obviously, we lost the picture on the end because they were actually rotted right and stuck right to the envelope. That's the other thing with wet photos. If you've got photos in envelopes that get wet, take them out of the envelopes as soon as you can and put them in a bag and write on it what was on the envelope. But don't leave them in the envelopes, because then you're going to be picking paper off them forevermore too. So this is just, there is some mold there, but that's an album that got wet. It got wet in clean water, so there wasn't a lot of mold in it. The cover had molded, though. That was the one I showed you the cover of. These negatives were, again, it was a roof leak that got these ones. And so we just pulled them out, cut them off, and then the same process for washing them and drying them, other than the photos we laid flat to dry, the negatives we hung by their sprockets to dry with bent out plastic paper clips, because we didn't want to rust them. And then that was just another picture of the edge of a stack of photos that were obviously had a little water. So that's some of the dry damage that was all dry. That wasn't wet. So re-wetting it doesn't help with the mold, but we did, like the album, and obviously this album, I'm not going to try and soak it in water because it's an old style album. It's paper. It'll disintegrate. So it was more trying to photograph the pages and getting rid of the cover, because the mold was actually limited to the cover. So when you get the most often result of photos that are wet and then dry while they're wet without anything being done to them is they stick together. So there's a photo of a pile of photos stuck together, and they are like a brick. They're stuck together so hard. Um, Again, the first thing is don't try and peel them apart when they're dry because you're going to rip them. They will just rip. You aren't going to be able to get them apart if they were wet and dried. The next thing is to know and with your own collection, you should know what was the source of the water damage, like where did it come from? Because this was a burst pipe, so it was clean water. So I knew that the chances of that there may be mold on them, but it wouldn't be nasty. It wasn't also other things that were nasty that might be on it. So again, you got to be careful though, because mold will grow when you wet them again, even if they're dry, if there has been mold. And we've looked at the signs of mold. These had no signs of mold. They were just really badly stuck together. And some of the bricks of photos, where's my camera, were a good couple inches thick, all stuck together. I took a picture of a smaller one. So what we did for that is I always photograph the top photo, because we're into this with this type of thing of something's better than nothing. So if I wreck the photo, if I've taken a picture of it, I at least have the top photo. And we look at it as a point of view is right now you can't see any of the photos except the top photo. So if we damage them or anything, in order and get some of them back, you're still better off than having the whole stack that you can't look at. Soak them in distilled water, which seems counterintuitive all the time, but it actually works really well. And the big black dots are just where I blotted out people's faces. They're not anything done to the photo. They're just digital blocks of blocked out the faces. So we just drop a brick of photos into the water. I use distilled water just because you don't know, depending on what the tap water is like. Our tap water is good, but I just use distilled just to make sure there's nothing else in it, and let them soak. So you start with 20 minutes, and then you gently try and peel them apart. Try and just peel the top one off and the bottom because they're both wet. And if it starts to come apart, that's good. If it seems like it's still stuck, back in the water they go. I've tried to introduce water between the photos. If a corner's peeled back but the middle's still stuck, I'll try and pour a little water, distilled water again, in between the photos to try and get more water in between them to get them to unstick. And as you can see there, we got quite a few unstuck. Sometimes the pile will separate and there'll still be some stuck together. Well, then they go back in the water. But whenever I got any free, I always took a picture of, and just camera pictures. I wasn't set up with a big camera, phone pictures rather. Just because that's better than nothing. If we can't get anything else apart, we're trying to get them prepared, obviously, to scan because of the damage. And again, if they won't go, back in the water. I haven't ever tried to get photos apart that were stuck with an adhesive. I suspect the water wouldn't work to get them apart if there was some kind of glue, because it wouldn't break up the glue. So that's basically how we separate photos that are stuck together because they've been wet and stuck together. Might get stuck together too if you live somewhere really humid. That can actually cause photos to stick together, just the humidity from them, without them actually getting wet. And again, the safety procedures are important, because if something's been wet, you don't know about how it got wet or the mold. Especially if you open up a box of photos that came from great grandmother, and I went down to help my mother clean out her storage unit a few years ago, and she lives in Pennsylvania and it's humid there, and the stuff was put away. Hi, Anne. I just saw somebody I recognize. I just saw the photos were kept in a cardboard box because nobody asked the photo person how to put them. In the rush to empty out her house, they got thrown in a cardboard box in a storage unit that was in a basement, kind of like I think it had cement, but might have been dirt basement, and the whole box was just stuck in there. And of course, then the photos molded because the humidity was significant to cause mold and damage. So I moved too fast. I was mentioning to Barbara, I have a problem with my camera that I get blurry if I move too fast, so I'll have to slow down. So that's basically what we do with stuck together photos. Any questions on that? We have
Always
Anne who just joined us. Anne Matuzek just joined us. She's an expert in this too. She's done a lot of this too.
Typically, we do
Not
this not by choice, right, Kathy?
yes, exactly. Learn not by choice. So
ex-
we talked a bit about adhesive sticky stuff. And so again, um, when you're making photo albums, and this is if we only knew now then what we knew now. So this on the far left is a photo album of a trip to England I took with my mom, my aunt, my uncle, and my dad, and a cousin, and my grandmother when we took her back to England, where she had in 1969 she'd been in Canada for 40 years and had never been home. So we took her back, and we visited all kinds of places. And my mom, bless her heart, made a scrapbook. The pages you see, if you see the matching white spots, if you look at them, you go, oh, those are like mirror images. She used white glue. And I did what I said don't do. So they all stuck together, and I pried the pages apart, and this is the result I got. Some were okay, and a bunch of them are wrecked. So, and that's very hard to fix. The ones where the backing just stuck from the previous photo, I may be able to wet that and get it off, but the one where the image got torn off, I have no way to get those back. The other thing she did first, and I guess it was too time consuming, so we moved to the white glue, was use tape. And that's quite common to find tape in albums and things taped down. So these are old. Like I say, we went on the trip in the 60s. So some of the things have fallen out because the tape has given way over time. The tape is aged. It has all yellowed. So everything in there, the pages that aren't ripped apart by yellow glue are very yellow. And they're sort of, and the tape is stuck firmly, like the picture there with the piece of tape on it down here. That's stuck very hard onto the photo, and you can see it actually moves down in one spot. Most of it's just on the frame of the photo, but some of it's actually on the print. So you don't want to try and tear that off because you're going to tear the photo. So you want to, again, never ever try and pry anything stuck together apart. Don't try and just yank it apart with your hands because you'll have a problem. With the Scotch tape, what I would do is cut it off where the tape is at the top of the photo, like cut the line where it's touching the photo, and then scan the photo and edit out the tape out of it. If there's glue on the back of a photo, as opposed to the front, if there's sticky stuff like the residue after we take apart our magnetic albums, or if there's just something sticky, sometimes you'll have photos that have been in an album and they're sticky. There's a bunch, several products or ways you can deal with that. One easy way is if you're just digitizing them, I wouldn't put them through a high-speed scanner. I'd use a flatbed. And you want to cover the back of them with, stick some archival paper to it. If you're going to keep the photos, if you're not going to keep them, stick some Post-it notes on the back, just so the glue doesn't get on your scanners or anything. You can also try and remove it, particularly if they were in older albums, they used to use rubber cement to glue photos into the album. That'll stick to the back. Hands going, yep, I've seen that. These things are called various things. One was a pickup square. They're also called a residue eraser for rubber cement. And I've used them on the glue from magnetic albums. And they do quite a good job at erasing the glue off the back without doing much damage. And you can get them on Amazon. Another product, which is also good for cleaning dirty slides or negatives, is the professional one, the PEC 12 pads in liquid. Those work very good for cleaning off glue on the backs or things even on the front. It's a product for photographers. And then there's another product called Undo. I've been reading lately some people not recommending it. I've used it to get sticky stuff off the back of photos without any damage to the photo, and it's really good at getting the glue off. And so it's I haven't ever had any problem with it. Of course, with any of this, you don't want to like dunk a whole bunch of, you don't want to pour a ton of PEC solution or a ton of unglue on it. You want to go gently. Everything is a gentle process. And we also stuck to glass. I skipped over that one quickly. Generally what we find was things stuck to glass, or often they've been in a frame and it's either the whole frame, but the photo is stuck to the frame or to the glass of the frame. So carefully I always photograph them first, as I said with everything else. I take a picture of it through the glass of the frame because something's better than nothing. Then carefully take all the frame off it. And if you can't get the photo, again, don't try and pry it off. Don't try and use a spatula. Don't try and use dental floss if it's stuck to the glass. But you can use the same process as we did with the stack of photos. I've soaked them in water, and they come off quite quickly. They separate from the frame, because usually they didn't get stuck to the frame because they got soaking wet or moldy. Usually it's a case of humidity. And so that will take them off without a whole lot of damage quite often. So, and it's the same process as we just talked about with the sticky photos. Soak them in water, check and see if it's coming off easily. If it's still stuck, put it back in for a while. And again, this works with all photos that were developed through a photo developing process. Things like inkjet prints, which obviously have been made from a digital photo anyway. So find that digital file, because inkjet prints, when they get wet, the whole emulsion just wipes right off and it's gone. So yeah, we don't do that. I said, again, don't ever try and pry anything apart. Any questions on or comments on sticky stuff?
I do.
Okay, go ahead,
a,
Barbara.
a simple thing. You talk about putting things to dry, like between sheets of wax paper, parchment, and so on, as we discussed earlier. It's sort of a stupid question, but I remember in a photo lab, you take prints out of the emulsion and you hang them, like with wooden, clips. Is that not a good idea?
That is a perfectly good idea too. If you have the space to hang them with something and just by the edges, that's a perfectly good way to dry them too.
Okay, I'm so used to having cats underfoot, Then the same, so ditto for negatives. A negative is the same kind of thing, essentially. It's the celluloid with the image into it. Okay.
The negatives and the slides I would definitely hang. I would never lay them flat to dry.
Okay.
And photos, when we laid them flat to dry, of course we laid them image up, or else the image would have stuck to the layers of paper. And on there, we didn't dry them on wax paper. We dried them on layers of newsprint, not published newsprint, like not with ink, but plain newsprint or scrapbook paper. And I mean scrapbook paper from the old style scrapbooks, the old pages that used to be in
paper. Like blotter paper.
Blotter paper, thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. And then paper towel that had no printing on it, like just plain paper towel. We'd lay them face up. And then, of course, they'd curl up as they dried, but they dry and the image stays intact. And so you try and shake as much water off as you can, if that's the method you have to use. If you do have the space to hang them, that's even better. If you can hang them up from a clothesline or something.
Yeah, okay.
And negatives and slides should be hung, because obviously there's two sides. Like a photo has a back that we don't care if that gets, if that sticks to a piece of paper as it dries, but we don't want the negative to stick to something else.
Thank you.
Okay. And speaking of curled photos, what a good intro to this. So if your photo is mildly curled, you can just scan it on a flatbed and just put a piece of glass over it to try and flatten it out. And that should work. Check to make sure how brittle a curled up photo. Just do a little gentle bending and see if feels like it's going to crack, in which case then you don't want to do that. You don't want to try and flatten it out with a piece of glass or a heavy book or anything, because you might damage the photo. And again, a lot of this is going to depend on where you're going to encounter curled up photos too, on the amount of humidity that lives in where you are. This photo was rolled up in a ball because it's 3 feet long. It's about a foot tall and 3 feet wide. So it was rolled up in the box it came out of, and it was quite curled. So don't try and flatten them. What you need to do then is build something called a rehumidification chamber. There used to be a good, I think it was from the Smithsonian, a good video on it, but it seemed to have gotten taken down at some point. So I've shared in the resources, there's one shared to Chaos to Memories, where there's a video of this process done by a photo manager colleague, Adam Pratt, and it's really good. It'll show you you get to watch the process, but I'm going to just show you what this looks like. So this is my photo in its rehumidification chamber. And so what this goes into the chamber is you need a bin that'll hold water. So I use a big clear Rubbermaid plastic bin. And you need some kind of rack. And this was help made. You could use like a dish rack that's got, but you want something with holes in it. You could use a plastic coated dish rack. You could use any other kind of rack. I wanted something that was plastic so that nothing would stick to it, or that I wouldn't use metal. I didn't want something that would rust either. And then you need some kind of holders to raise the rack out of the water. And I used these little red things. They were called painter's tips from a place that does a lot of stuff for woodworkers and things. So that I had a whole bunch of them, and so I used them. And 100% polyester fabric, a piece of that. And that's what the photos lay on. So here's the chamber. It's got about an inch of water in it. Nothing near is going to touch the photos, because this isn't one where we want to wet them. We don't need to wet them to uncurl them. Then the polyester material is over top in the top right photo. And then you seal the container. I've just laid I don't know what I have under the books, probably the lid to the container and then the books on it, because you're creating a humid environment for the photos to start to unroll. So if you look at this, the curled up, the rolled up ones at the top, that was a whole stack. They weren't unrolling, and they weren't going to be able to unroll them enough to scan them. And so that's they're in the humidification chamber, and sometimes you have to wait quite a while, but they literally unroll on their own. It's quite amazing to watch that process, to see them unrolling, but they start to unroll, and it's just very cool. So, and here's some of them just after they came out of there that are now flat enough to scan. Now, they may or may not stay flat after you rehumidify them. I think that's going to depend on what kind of environment you live in. I live in the dry land, so we have very low humidity where I am. Not as bad as some of the southern states there, but on the West Coast, not as bad as New Mexico, but we don't have a whole lot of humidity here, and so they all curled back up. So it was a case where they had to be scanned before they curled up again. So, and again, it was a case of, do we want to keep those curled up photos because they're in a box now? They're all curled up again, and it was like the big long one that I showed you, the 3 foot long. That's pretty amazing. Like, and it stayed flat. Now we don't know what to do with it because it's 3 feet long, and it's like, what kind of box do you put that in? So, any questions about this one? Because I think the curled photos are very common.
Kathy, you had a link from the family curator with a tutorial, how to
Yes.
relax and rehumidify. Add that one?
Yeah. Yes, that's another link. That's a good one too. And they go through the process. The only thing they don't do that both I have done and Adam does is put the polyester fabric. They just laid the photos right on the rack. So
What's
I like
the
the
magic?
idea.
What's
Huh?
the magic of what's magic about polyester as opposed to linen or something
It
else?
doesn't, it's
Oh.
neutral. It doesn't stick to the photos, and it
Oh.
just provides a little bit of a barrier between the water and the racks and everything.
Any kind of cotton or linen would absorb the moisture. I got it.
Yeah, exactly. You want something that won't absorb the moisture. So,
Clever.
yes. All righty. Porn photos. Sorry, I have to keep moving around so I can see what I'm looking at. So this is a photo, the far left, that's my grandfather. And we believe it's one of my great uncles who passed away as an infant, because a couple of them passed away very young. And this is in England, not on the farm in Canada. We can tell that very plainly. And so the picture was extremely badly faded and tears in it and everything else. And sometimes with photos like that, and again, like what I said before, how important is the photo? And before you try and do anything to a photo that's a heritage photo that there's only one of and there's nowhere to get another one of, think about, is it worth you experimenting on? In this case, I sent mine out to be professionally restored, and the next photo is the results. And I'm delighted because that's nothing I could have done. I could have tried to edit all that out and fix it, but the restoration, I had that done by the company I worked with forever, did this restoration, and they did just such an astounding job. And they sent me one both in sepia and also in black and white. So I had my choice of, because this one, the original is very hard to tell what it started out as. But there's a number of products. If you just copy it, you can use editing software to fix the tears, depending on your skill with editing and that. But you can use an editing software to replace the tears, fix the missing parts, and also fix the fading, because obviously that picture was very badly faded too. For tears, if you want to do it yourself, I have done this with some things. That Filmoplast is a very good product. I've used it. There's another one called Lineco, which is also archival document. I haven't used that one, but I've definitely used the Filmoplast to repair torn documents and torn photos. And so what I did, I use it primarily on the back of the document or the photo, not the front. You can see through it, but I really don't like to put more sticky stuff on the front of a photo. So I put it on the back, and what I'm trying to do is line up the tear so that it doesn't show as badly in the photo when I scan it, just to put it back together. And I had a newspaper article from I guess from 1910 or something, and it was badly falling apart, and I just used the tape to try and put the pieces back together, because of course it was all torn where it had been folded, just to get enough of it sort of so I could lay it on a scanning bed and get a scan. So there's a couple products that if you want to use it on your own photos, and I've used it on my own stuff that was, where a photo was torn, but it wasn't like my heritage photo of my grandfather with perhaps the only photo in existence of that particular uncle. So you can fix the tears just to make, and again, we're talking about getting things prepared to digitize, because you can do a lot more when they're digitized. And obviously, I'm not going to throw out that old photo of my grandfather. I'm going to keep that original safely secured in an archival envelope, because it is the original. But I'm going to use in my legacy collection will go the scan with the good photo. So it's a question of, what to do, how to look after that. And so fading is an easy fix with most editing software, even auto-correcting software, provided that it's not only part of the picture that's faded. So this is the bottom of a picture I took out of a frame and just had scanned. I took it literally right off the wall and sent it away. And you can see, luckily this was a small frame, but you can see the contrast on the edges where you can see where the matte was on the frame, and that the rest of the photo was badly faded and washed out, because it is in fact a color photo, not a black and white. But so one thing, this one would be easy to fix, because you could simply scan it, and which I did, and I'm going to crop the faded part out, because it isn't over, it's not close, it'll be easy to be cropped out. But I couldn't find a picture of this. I was trying to find a picture. I talked in one of the Project Kid Live about the old frames that you used to get at like Kmart or Zellers that would have 20 pictures in one big frame, and over top they'd have the mats that were round or oval shaped to sect out. Those are very hard to edit yourself. And hopefully, if the person didn't decide to cut the pictures before they went in and tape them to the back of the frame, which I've dealt with, by the way, you could again use the method of scanning and cropping them. You probably need a higher level of editing skill than I have to try and edit partially faded photos that still have color. And you need to know what you need, as I say, can probably do it in Photoshop or other editing software, but you need to know a little bit more of how to work those than I do. So I go for the cropping, or if they're an important enough photo, restore the restoration. So, and that's what I got. That's a brief tour through loads of damage to photos, and I think Anne. Oh, I forgot to talk about smell. What happened to my slide
Yeah,
on
what kind of
smell? Smelly photos. That's another one. And so again, it depends on why they smell. If you open up a box of musty photos, or they smell like if they've been in the home of a smoker, they're going to smell like it. You can put things in there like baking soda, activated charcoal, or even unscented dryer sheets, because you don't want to fragrant, like you don't want to turn the photos into smelling like spring breeze or something. So a plain dryer sheet, you can also do that. So you're going to put them in a container. You don't want the charcoal or any of that stuff to touch the photos. So you're going to need some way to elevate the pictures around this stuff, and then put a lid on it and just let them sit in there for a while. And it'll help remove some of the smell. If it's a smoke smell from a fire, and I know Anne has experience with this that I don't have. I've never had to do photos from fire. Anne did a lot from a house fire. But if there's soot on the photos, you're going to want to use a soft brush or something to brush it off. You don't want to put them in a water bath, I don't think. If they've got smoke or soot on them, you don't want those to go in water, because I think you're going to get mud if you do that. So you just want to brush them softly with a soft cloth. There's a special smoke removing sponge now that you can see on Amazon. And Anne, do you want to chime in?
I think that sometimes it's confusing because you would think that the water bath would be perfect, but the truth is, smoke for the most part is greasy. It's got a component to it that makes it sticky, and getting the water on there, it's almost like a waterproofing layer. And so now you have sooty fingerprints or sooty marks on the photo that are much more difficult to remove once it's wet. You're much better off with a very soft brush and starting with that. You can use some of the foam brushes, but a lot of times they're not soft enough and they will cause some scratching to the photos. And then the ultimate in the 1-2 punch is so many photos that are in a fire don't just have smoke damage. Many times they also have water damage. And so now you have soot or smoke, and then you may also have mold and mildew. And so when you're opening a box, bin, bag, whatever it is, you're going to start out with at the very least, a basic mask, and many times immediately move to a rebreather to protect yourself. And you're wearing gloves to protect yourself from the photos and the yuck that is part of that.
Yeah. And old clothes. I learned that very quickly, because when we were cleaning the flood photos, because as soon as I'd open up even the frozen ones, I'd take some frozen ones out of a bag, and immediately all the water, like they were in clothes, they were Creative Memories albums with page protectors. So the water got under the page protectors. And so the minute you held them up, then water would pour all over your feet, or like a pocket album, the pocket pages with the little slide in photos. I didn't talk about those. You're better off to cut the plastic off. You don't want to try and pull the photo off, or because if it looks good and you try and pull it out, you may rip the emulsion off. But also the water will be trapped in there and run all over your feet and stuff. So you do kind of want to have old clothes. And again, as Anne said, and I'd said earlier, Anne, that I wear a respirator mat the minute I think anything has anything on it, because smoke is particularly, I don't know about house fire smoke, but wildfire smoke has toxic chemicals in it too. So, and probably house fire smoke, because toxic stuff
Yeah,
burns.
even more so with house fire, because there
Yeah,
are so many chemicals involved in all of that.
yeah,
And the water that Kathy's talking about, you will smell like the worst fetid swamp water that you can imagine. There is not a word that describes this particular odor.
yeah.
It's pretty rough. And
Yeah.
whenever possible, I will scan or take pictures of the pages before it. And you probably talked about that already, Kathy, before I move anything, because
Mhm.
just the act of moving it may separate that image from the paper.
Exactly. And I said in this because I wasn't going to talk. I was talking about, you know, things we might have on our own personal collection. So I promised them when I talked about it last time, I wouldn't bore them with thousands of photos of flood damaged photos that I have. But I showed enough of them just to get the idea of what it is. But it's, yeah, we used to comment that every time we opened a new batch up, because we did all the work in my garage, because I don't know if I mentioned that too. Part of the safety is to watch where you do this work. I had seen at one point after some, I don't know if it was Hurricane Sandy, but some big disaster, maybe the flooding in Houston, with a picture of somebody all set up in the public library cleaning moldy photos. And yeah, it's Anne's reaction. I just went, should I say this is really not a good place to be? Because mold, if it's dry, it's airborne. It'll move, like if it dries, it goes in the air. And if it's wet, it gets all over your surfaces and stuff. And it's really not like to be honest, both myself and another photo manager, friend of mine who scanned a bunch of my stuff, who has bad asthma, we both think we did a little lung damage to ourselves because we didn't know any better. And so we were wearing like not really like we wore gloves because our stuff was so muddy, but just knowing now what I know then, it's like later on the pictures you see me with the respirator on, that's after when I went down later on. And I think the opening slide, I have the picture of me in the garage wearing a whole Tyvek suit. That was when I started on an album that had been frozen for about 6, 7 years, an album that somebody had preserved from High River and saw my little blurb about freezing them. So she froze the album. It was her daughter's baby book. And then I happened to meet this lady in a yoga class for old people that I was taking. And the yoga instructor said, well, talk to Kathy. She knows all about this stuff. And then it came out that she had seen one of the things I said about freezing it. And so she says, can you do anything with this? So it had to be thawed, and it was quite the process. But I then had some great talented friends who helped me recreate the pages that were with the photos, because it was all scrapbooked on paper. It wasn't on a scrapbooking page. It was all done on paper, which is quite a common way to scrapbook. And paper and water just don't mix, but it's tough to save. But
Yeah.
so I wanted to just give.
Anne's posted a picture into the chat. Do you want to tell us about that picture, Anne?
Oh, this was just an example of this woman who had a fire upstairs, thought everything in the basement was fine because the fire was in her kitchen, but didn't realize how much water had come through the floor into her basement and directly into her bin of heritage photos and her scrapbook of her school days. And so this was her high school senior picture. And by the time she realized it had been several days, she was dealing with all the fire stuff, had been out of her house for several days. Some of the team that came to help her with it literally took all of her scrapbooks, photos, and everything and threw them in a clothes basket. And there they sat for about 2 weeks before she realized what had happened. So when I got them, they were dry-ish. But they were mostly just ish. And so anything that had a plastic coating, you can just see how the emulsion was eaten on these pictures. And so again, working in a garage is usually the best where you've got better air circulation, or if you have access to to a machine from one of the restoration companies that can do an air filtration system, it's going to really help. But the truth is, any of these projects, when you're dealing with water or fire damage photos, this is going to be more of a labor of love than it is going to be a business decision. Because it's impossible for you to be paid enough for the amount of hours you're going to put into it. And yet every photo that you recover for these people is so preciously valued by them. So this is let's avoid this at all costs and try to be proactive in taking care of our photos before, and we'll deal with the little things like stupid magnetic albums and getting photos out of them, and old scrapbooks and tape and those kind of situations.
Yeah. And I'll show one just because and tell you the story behind it. Let me share my screen and we'll pick that one. So this is one of are you seeing the back? Yeah, you are. This is a bag of somebody's, there was two big green garbage bags. This is a bag of somebody's photos, albums, their whole life of memorabilia and everything in this garbage bags. And they belong to a lady in the town of High River south of here, which is one of the ones that had the worst flooding, because there were some places where the community, a whole community was built in something that the native people called the dry lake. And we found out why, because it was low down like a dip, and it filled with water, and it took close to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks for the water to recede out of it before people could even get into their homes. And so, yeah, think about that smell, Anne. The slough. But this, so some people knew I was doing this just by word of mouth, and so a friend of mine stumbled upon this lady. She was sitting on her front porch of her once she got in her house and sobbing, an older lady that and so she was about waiting for someone to come and throw all this in the garbage. And this person knew what I was doing and said, well, let me take them because I have a friend who might be able to do something. And the person that did this had also suffered great loss because she lived there. And so she called me, and she showed up on my doorstep, just rang the doorbell. She goes, I'm sorry to come so late at night, but can you do anything? And so, yeah, that was, again, where there was a lot of bad stuff. Fascinating too, like that picture Anne had. I have one that they were stuck in an album, and the water got under the emulsion and lifted the emulsion off the photo, but it didn't come off. It was sitting there with a puddle of water underneath it. And we're like looking at it like, I don't really know what's going to happen here. And so we thought, well, what if we poke it with a pin, if it'll just slap back onto the photo? And it kind of did, not really well, but some of them, it had lifted the emulsion off, and there were big bubbles of water underneath. And that's what I hope that none of you ever have to encounter with your own photos. And that's why we talk in Kathy's Corner and at Project Kin about preserving our photos and stories all the time, is because so that doesn't happen to you. And most of you here gathered here, I know, have done a lot of work already on preserving your photos. So we thought we'd just throw this out because it is Save Your Photos Month, but give you a little bit of insight into what you can do if you find those photos with some damage on them.
Wow. Thank you, Kathy. And Anne, a special guest.
Yes.
Thank you so much. This is motivational as well as instructional, because and a warning about if it smells bad, it probably is bad, unless you know it is an old banana. If you don't know what it is, you don't want to know. That's very helpful. So I'll be capturing all of this to share with the recording. And I assume, Anne, that the picture that you shared it belongs to somebody privately. So I will not include that with the notes. Yeah.
Nope, you're muted, Anne.
I do have permission to use that.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll be sure to include the reference to you, and the source, and your Substack pathway.
And I'm just going to add this at the end, because not that this would apply to any of you, but anybody later on watching the video, our podcast, is I share freely of all these things, because I don't want people to end up like what we've seen, like Anne and I have seen. But the images that I show are copyrighted by me, and they are my property. And so I'd appreciate if we respect that. And the same as the one that Anne shared. She's generously shared this photo with us. So, it's Anne's photo. So.
And this one is copyrighted by my business partner, my former company, Pixology. Kathy's very familiar with this one. You mentioned before the ability to hang photos, and this is a perfect example of that. This is utilizing a step ladder, because most of the photos are 4x6. And how do you hang rows and rows and rows of photos? Well, if you use a step ladder, you can string it back and forth between all the rungs of the ladder, and little tiny craft clothespins. And this is restoring a set that that Molly Bartelt and her husband worked on extensively for a client. So
And thank you for sharing that, Anne,
do
because
you remember
I
that
had
day?
I have a copy of it. And I thought, oh, I don't have time to get a hold of Molly and ask permission to use it. So I didn't show it because I was going to say, because there's lots of pictures of my laying flat, but I thought the
Mhm.
hanging one, this is it's quite remarkable too when you look at the quantity. And again, while we say these were results of disasters, that was one family's photos though, in these pictures. And all mine we didn't do like multiple families all at once. We did one family at a time. So it was still working on that and giving them enough back so they could tell their stories. That was the goal always. And sometimes they got pictures back that the whole outside, like a scan where the outside of the picture was gone. But if it's the only photo you have, it's priceless.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. I'm will follow up to get all of this captured and appropriately in the notes. And thank all of you for joining us today for another episode. We do this each and every month, and somehow you're always hitting us with brand new perspectives and information. That is entirely new. Now I'm wondering about the source of my asthma. Let's just say I
Yeah.
do know what mold smells like.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you all so much again, and get out there and use the motivation to protect your own precious artifacts. Again, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.